Blending up fun, freshly frozen beverages from shakes and smoothies to bowls and cocktails has never been easier than the For Real by Riches back-of-house blender. Simply grab a For Real by Riches frozen base cup, place it in a blender, and press start for hands-free, mess-free blending in under a minute. Customize or serve it as is. It's that easy. Learn more about For Real by Riches at richesusa.com/forreal-food service.
Hey there, welcome to Takeaway with Sam Oches, a podcast from Nation's Restaurant News. I am Sam Oches, editor-in-chief here at NRN, and this is the show where I give you an all-access pass to the restaurant industry's most influential decision makers. This week, I'm talking with Erin Wade, the founder of Homeroom, an Oakland-based mac and cheese restaurant concept with 3 locations. Erin just this week released a book called The Mac Cheese Millionaire, Building a Better Business by Thinking Outside the Box, which details her journey going from lawyer to restaurant entrepreneur and how she and her team achieved a more collaborative and meaningful work environment by building unique systems at Homeroom. Erin's name may sound familiar to you as she made waves several years ago after she wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post detailing the harassment that her employees were enduring from customers and the unique solution that Homeroom developed to combat that problem. She joined the podcast to talk about her new book and the color-coded system that has helped to protect her employees from harassment and build trust among her team in the process. In this interview, you will learn more about why a better working environment leads to better restaurant performance, why harassment from your customers may be a bigger problem than you think, and why, if you want to build a strong culture, you need to start with trust. Jumping now into my interview with Homeroom's Erin Wade. Also, don't forget to stick around after the interview as I will share my 5 takeaways from this discussion, actionable insights that you can take with you on the go. Okay, I'm sitting down with Erin Wade, the founder of Homeroom and the author of the upcoming book. Actually, when this publishes, the published book, The Mac Cheese Millionaire. Erin Wade, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Erin, I told you before we hit record, but I have been to Homeroom, your restaurant in Oakland, which is a mac and cheese restaurant, and it was incredible. I remember the first thing I thought was, this is the biggest serving of mac and cheese I've ever received in my life, and it was so stinking delicious.
Yeah.
But for those who have not visited, tell us a little bit more about Homeroom and what this restaurant is all about.
Sure. So Homeroom is just a mecca to macaroni and cheese. That is what we are dedicated to. It is not a side dish, but the main dish. So we have anywhere from like 10 to 15 varieties on the menu at any given time. And there are, some like veggie sides and beer and wine and some like homemade nostalgic desserts. But really the mac and cheese is the focus. And the goal was just, there's a lot of restaurants dedicated to pizza or tacos or ice cream. We just wanted to be, the restaurant dedicated to macaroni and cheese.
But it is a full service restaurant, right? As I remember, there was full service on one half and you had kind of the takeout counter on the other half. Why did you feel like this was a full service operation?
Yeah, it really had to do with the kind of experience that we wanted guests to have. And, we actually expanded that takeout counter to sort of a standalone takeout location like a block away. So,
oh, nice.
So the truth is you could just, get it, take it home and, have that experience at home, which, many people choose to do. But, the thought was, we actually had a lot of people telling us, oh, you should do counter service. Oh, you should do counter service. And actually we listened to them and within a week pivoted because we had always thought it'd be nice to have full service because we wanted to have a real connection with the guest and have it be like, a lot of people, I think that the concept of Homeroom is successful because of the mac and cheese, which in many ways is true. Like it is hands down the best you'll ever eat. But to me, the deeper concept behind it is I had worked a lot in fine dining previously. And I thought, hey, why do you tend to have restaurants that are like inexpensive, but not high on ambiance or service or very expensive and, offer you this great experience? Like it doesn't cost, more to provide a great experience, to have great design, to have fabulous service. It just takes you caring more. And so that was sort of the idea is let's provide tremendous value. Let's have an experience that you'd be happy to take a date to, celebrate a birthday at. We wanted to be a special place for people where you could develop memories around this really nostalgic food.
What was the concept Homeroom itself, the name of the concept? Where did that come? How does that fit that model that you wanted to start?
Yeah, it's really just a throwback to the class in school, which honestly serves no other purpose than just hanging out with your friends. There's nothing you're like learning in homeroom. So, I liked it because it brings you back to this time of childhood of just like connecting with friends, goofing off. I think mac and cheese is an inherently nostalgic food. So, bring people back to sort of memories of childhood and having fun with people. We really wanted to invoke that.
Sure. So you mentioned your experience in fine dining before. Tell me about your history in the restaurant industry. What were you doing before Homeroom?
Yeah, so I had a sort of a funny, roller coaster of a professional journey on the way to Homeroom. I had started in college, been really obsessed with restaurants, and actually volunteered to learn how to cook, and moved to New York and started working in some different fine dining restaurants. And while I loved it, I couldn't make a living. The work environments left much to be desired. And at some point I was just like, what the heck am I doing here? Like I could barely pay my rent. I was working 6 days a week. It was just nuts. So, I did what other lost, smart, driven people who have no direction do, and decided to go to law school. And I actually ended up becoming an attorney. And it was only after practicing and being really unhappy and actually being fired, because I was just honestly not good at my job because I didn't care, that I started thinking about restaurants again. And I asked myself, hey, could I have a different experience? What if I made my own restaurant so I could sort of fix these problems that I had experienced, so that I could make the kind of work environment that I wish I had had that could have nurtured me, as opposed to sort of forcing me out of the industry. So that was the genesis of Homeroom, was a combined, passion for, food and restaurants, with also this desire to create the kind of workplace that I wish I could have, grown up in.
Sure. All right. So speaking of workplace, you sort of got a name for yourself, I guess you could say, or you emerged on the national scene with an op-ed, and it was on workplace environment, specifically on toxicity, on sexual harassment your team was facing, I believe, from customers. You built a whole system in response to this, a color-coded system to really help your team, to protect your team, and to make sure everybody felt safe in the environment. Tell me about this. What was the problem? And tell me a little bit more about then the solution you came up with to address the problem.
Sure. As backstory, and I'm sure we'll get to it later in the interview, but we developed a lot of systems over the years to sort of create a much more collaborative and meaningful work environment than those I had previously worked in. And I think the beauty of that is that when you create a better work environment, honestly, your company does better and you're better at solving problems. So at some point this was many years in, probably like 6 or 7 years into Homeroom being open. A number of female staff members came to me and said that they were experiencing harassment. And I was from customers, specifically. And I was really devastated. I had no idea that was happening, which was, pretty embarrassing, if I'm honest. And I was so proud of all these things we had done to make this great place to work. But we did, what I think we've done with a lot of problems, which was get all the people impacted to help try to create the solution together. And so actually a team of, female employees at Homeroom who are all affected by this came up with this system, and it ended up really transforming our experience with harassment in the workplace. And so, it became the subject of a viral op-ed I wrote about in the Washington Post. I went to Washington to testify about it in front of the EEOC. And anyway, I'm happy to share how it works, but it's since been adopted by restaurants around the globe. So we're really, proud of it.
Well, and before we get into talking about that, how it works, tell me about the scope of this problem. I have actually not worked in a restaurant environment, but I've covered this industry for 15 years. So I know very well that the workplace is never perfect. In fact, lots of restaurant workplaces are dealing with toxicity. But also, when you speak of sexual harassment in the restaurant workplace, your mind might first jump to among employees, and perhaps from a manager to an employee. Mm-hmm. Your problem, and perhaps you had that problem too, but of course, the problem you really were addressing here was with customers sexually harassing your teammates. Tell me about the scope of this problem. I'm sure a lot of people listening have experienced experience this too, but what is there something we're not seeing? I mean, it seems like there's something under the surface here that really does need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm sure it's a huge problem. I mean, 1 in 10 American workers works in hospitality. And of those, I mean, there's different survey data, but, as much as 70% of them have experienced harassment by customers. So, I mean, that's millions of people who have this experience. All I can say is with the women who brought it to me, almost all had previous restaurant experience and said, hey, this is the first place we actually felt comfortable talking about it. So I think it is epidemic, but not talked about nearly as much as it needs to be. And in large part, I think people don't trust that there will be a solution or anything to be done. It feels like a really unfortunate fact of life, and I think that's why I'm excited about our system, because I think it's really easy for places to implement. It's really effective. And so, I don't think it has to be like this.
Walk me through then how it works. Because I mean, it feels like a very big problem to address, and you've come up with this pretty clever and I would say simplified solution, but tell me how it works.
Yeah. So, what we realized is that we needed a system that didn't depend on people making judgment calls, because that's actually what was really going wrong for us. Some people were reporting it, but depending on who they reported it to, if that person wasn't particularly sensitive, maybe didn't have a background, maybe didn't understand, didn't find something threatening, they wouldn't do anything about it. Even if they did find it threatening, they would start going down a rabbit hole of oh, did the person mean to do it? So we were like, okay, you know what? We just need to have a system that everyone implements the same no matter what. So came up with this color-coded system, and there's 3 colors: yellow, orange, and red, and then sort of attendant action that a manager needs to take when each one is reported. So a yellow is nothing more than just a creepy vibe. So let's say a server is at a table and it's just ooh, I don't know what's going on, but this person makes me feel uncomfortable. All I have to do is go to a manager and say, hey, I've got a yellow at table 2. And in that case, it's sort of employee choice. If the server wants a manager to take over the table, they can. Sometimes they just want to alert them hey, can you sort of keep your eye on this for me? I'm not sure what's happening here. Maybe it's fine. Maybe it's not. An orange is a creepy vibe plus an ambiguous comment. So let's say something like, I like your shirt. If a little kid says that to you, it's going to feel totally benign. If someone you're getting a bad feeling about says it to you, it might feel oh gosh, this person is starting to come on to me, right? So in that case, you would just go to a manager and say, hey, I've got an orange at table 2. And the manager just has to automatically take it over. So then a red is a sexually explicit comment. So something like, you look sexy in that shirt, or touching. And in that case, the staff member just needs to go to a manager, and the manager is required to ask the customer to leave. So it's, pretty simple, easy to use. No one has to explain anything. It just is very fast and efficient on the floor of a busy restaurant. But what is, I think, most impressive about it is that, we just came up with it as a way of dealing with harassment. We didn't think it was going to stop it from happening, but just gave us a way to deal with it. But it actually ended up significantly reducing to almost nothing the incidence of the red forms of harassment, because almost no one goes into a restaurant and just, tries to touch someone, right? They walk in, they sort of check them out, they start making some low-level comments, they see how it's tolerated, and then they escalate their behavior. So when you stop it from escalating, it just changes the power dynamics at a really low level, and situations really escalate. So I think that's the thing that we're most proud of. And, customers don't know it's being used. So I think it makes a positive environment. No one necessarily needs to know. There's no judgment call. Was this or was this not happening? It's just really, really clear, easy to use, and it's effective.
Yeah, this is not something you're putting out on your door saying, hey, this is a system we're using here, so sexual harassers steer clear, right? I mean, This is not something you're promoting or marketing. This is internal only. So it's kind of amazing, though, that you were able to nip it in the bud. I imagine your manager, the onus is on the manager to really ensure that the system is actually working, right? Because your teammate is coming to the manager to enforce it. And without that, this whole system kind of falls apart, right?
Yeah, that's true. And honestly, we did have issues with it in the beginning, because even though it seems really simple, especially when it came to these red situations of asking a guest to leave, a lot of, managers would have issues if they perhaps didn't think that maybe the person didn't mean to do something, especially as it would relate to touching a guest, touching a staff member.
Right.
And so, we had to start teaching people, hey, like intent is not the same as impact. And like, you can ask someone to leave, like whether or not they meant to, harass that person is sort of irrelevant. If they touched them, you just say like, hey, we're sorry, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave. You touched our staff member and that's just against our rules. And, you've got to
Sure.
go. So it was really helpful, I think, to just take a lot of those judgment calls out of people's hands and be like, look, just give them the tools to address really challenging situations with, simple tools and simple language and not have to start getting lost in their head about how to do it right.
Could you transfer this to an internal thing too among teammates? I mean, have you ever had this issue just internally among your team members to where you have to use a system for your teammates? I mean, obviously with something like that, you just fire somebody on the spot if they're sexually harassing their coworker. But I mean, there's a real internal corporate culture toxicity that exists among restaurants that perhaps needs to be addressed too. Do you feel like your system could be something that could help?
Well, I'd say yes and no. So, I mean, I think the reason no is because, so I guess I'll start with the yes. We found it was really helpful because it gave people the colors, give people a language to describe what was happening. So if they were having an issue with a manager, I'd say the most thorny ones are actually sort of in orange, where someone gives you a bad feeling and is saying something ambiguous. So you're uncomfortable, but it hasn't like crossed a clear line. I'd say that's where it falls short, right? Because in a restaurant setting, you can just send in a manager to deal with that table. If that person is your manager, what do you do? So, I mean, that being said, I think that having the language was empowering because, for instance, like I did have a server, I had a manager who used to make a lot of, like he thought they were really positive comments about people's appearance. He'd be like, love your hat, cool shirt. And he told this one server that she had a nice smile, which, could be benign or it could be like a come on. And it made her feel uncomfortable. She was like, this would be an orange if a customer said it. So she, escalated that to me. And I did. I had a talk with him. We explained it. We talked about why he can't do that anymore. As a manager, you shouldn't ever be doing something that could be in the orange territory.
Right. Yeah.
And then a better way to sort of channel that enthusiasm or like that desire to compliment people is actually just to focus on their work. I'm like, no one cares what you think about their hat, but they're going to be really excited if you think they're doing a good job. So focus on that, so it was actually, I think it was helpful all the way around. Like that server had language to talk about what was happening. The manager had language to understand why it was like not great. And, we turned it around, but I think you have to have a lot of trust built into an environment. You have to have someone at the top who cares, right, for that to work. And it is harder. Like that helped us internally, but it's harder than with customers because it's not just a quick interaction.
Right. And I think to take a step back too, I mean, thinking about the fact that restaurants have historically been a very thorny workplace, and there's a lot of factors. There are late hours, there's drug and alcohol consumption, there's stress, the high pressure nature of the job. And it's interesting because, certainly in the last few years, thankfully, a lot of this has come to light. Thankfully, with Me Too and addressing sexual harassment in the workplace, I think there is a language, to your point, that there did not exist before. But where I'm interested in this is like, I hear from companies all the time talking about their culture. And personally, when I hear the word culture, I think, well, but what does that mean? Because you can say we've got a culture, but that could mean nothing. So I guess if I were to put this in a question for you, how do you feel about the status of company culture specifically in restaurants today, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's other issues that exist? Do you think there's been improvements that we have made as an industry? What more do you think needs to be done to ensure that employees feel safe, customers feel safe, everybody's taken care of, that there genuinely is a strong culture, whatever that means to the business?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I totally agree with you that I think culture or people specifically bragging about their culture is a lot of times it's sort of bullshit. It's like something that hangs on a wall that, maybe someone in power cares about, but it's not trickling down through the organization in any meaningful way.
Right.
And so, I can only tell you what we did, which is, to me, those other values like, are we being truly collaborative and transparent and, caring about something bigger than ourselves? Like these are all, frankly, these are all things you can measure, you can hire for them, you can promote based on them. So, our employee reviews were actually only 25% was based on your actual job performance at your duties. So things like cooking food, cleaning tables, because we felt like, to be honest, the other 75% is really important. And they were based on our other values, which had to do with like collaboration, transparency. Were you being a great teammate and creating a better place to work and improving this business that we all cared about? Because if you weren't, there's a lot of jobs that are just going to care about how well you do when you show up, on your job duties. And we felt like our culture was really meaningful. And I mean, I think it makes a huge difference. Like average tenure in the industry is, I believe, something like 90 days, and our average tenure is 2.5 years. Like people want to be a part of that, but you have to be very disciplined about, like, that has to mean something. Those values you have to translate into action.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and sorry, I guess I was going to say the last piece on that is, I mean, I think that's a big part of why I was really excited to write the book. I think a lot of people have honestly like really noble ideals. They like want to have these values. They just don't know how to make them come to life. So I think for me, that was a huge goal, is being like, hey, if you want to run a restaurant or any kind of business differently, if you want to be based on values of, meaning, purpose, collective success, collaboration, like read the book, like there are actual tools that you can implement that are going to make your workplace more like that.
For sure. Yeah. And before we get into the book, I wanted to also make sure we touched on, you mentioned the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You testified before them and they have adapted your system. Tell me quickly about that. What does that mean?
I mean, they put together a task force to really, in the face of Me Too, to understand what was happening in different industries, what were best practices going on across the country that they could recommend for people, because people were really looking for solutions. It was pretty clear there was a problem. So I was invited along with a lot of other, business owners, founders, tech company, all sorts of people who are doing lots of different and innovative things. And then the task force published its report so that if you want to learn about all these ideas, you can. And it's a big deal. That's the organization that is, from the United States government, really in charge of how do we handle harassment in this country. So it was a big honor to be invited. And I'm grateful that they've spread the word.
That's awesome. That's an awesome opportunity for you. Okay, I want to talk about the book because, to your point, you've put a lot of these thoughts into your book. The Mac Cheese Millionaire, I want to make sure I get this subhead right because it's important to the angle of the book here, building a better business by thinking outside the box. Now, it's not out today as you and I talk, but by the time everybody's listening to this, it will be available. September 24th, it is publishing. But I want to talk about that concept of thinking outside the box, because you've mentioned building systems and how you've built some systems for Homeroom. Thinking outside the box, everybody likes to think they're thinking outside the box and being creative and clever. But this means something to you. Tell me what that means, first off, when you think about how you've thought outside the box for how you've structured Homeroom. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, it was a bit of a double entendre because in part, Mac and Cheese were obviously dedicated to, creating an alternative to craft, But in terms of the business, I mean, like I mentioned, I had only worked in places that I found pretty disappointing and uninspirational. And so I had these like noble ideals of creating this really great place that I wanted to work, that other people would want to work, but I had no idea how to do it. And so, I spent 10 years developing a lot of systems that really increase, communication, collaboration, collective success, really focus on how do you build like meaning and purpose in both an individual career and in a workplace. And so through like tremendous trial and error, we came up with a number of systems that we found are really effective in doing those things. And so it really was thinking outside the box. There wasn't like a playbook for this. It was like putting, noticing things, trying stuff that didn't work, trying things that did work, and putting together sort of an amalgam of systems that for us were tremendously effective. And I think would work for lots of other businesses too.
Of course, I want everybody to go buy this book to get for themselves to understand, your story and your suggestions. But broad level, 30,000 foot viewpoint here. Tell us a little bit more about the book, what it means to you, why you decided to write it. What are some things that people will learn by reading this book?
Yeah. So, this book was really the kind of book that I wish I could have picked up, when I first started my business or when I was struggling at various moments in my business. And I think I really wanted to achieve two things with it. One is frankly to make people laugh. It's a funny story. I'd say it's really part traditional business book, part memoir. So, each chapter includes sort of a personal anecdote as well as, a sort of a business story and tools and techniques to use. Because I think, business books can be really, really dry. And I was like, there's no reason for this. Businesses are often these very human stories, and the struggles we have are very relatable. And anyone from, just who's working in a company as some kind of, manager or who cares about their career to a founder is going to relate to the ideas in the book. So I think I wanted to create something relatable and funny in the business genre because I feel like it's just really lacking. But then I think the second part was just to give people who want to run a different kind of business, something that is, more meaningful, more purposeful, more collaborative, more fun, the tools that I wish I had to make that happen for themselves. And so I really try to focus on, teaching those throughout the book so that someone could walk away and be like, oh, great, I have this cool way I could do this thing or this thing.
That's great. Erin, what's next for you? You've written this book. I imagine you're going to be going to tell the world about the book. You've got a restaurant. I mean, what's next? What do you hope to accomplish next in your career?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think this, I'm lucky enough to be living it. My desire was really to spread the impact of these ideas beyond the walls of Homeroom. And I think they have the ability to change the way business is done all over the place. And I'm really inspired by that. So I'm excited to help other entrepreneurs, other executives, other business people, sort of create greater meaning, because why else are we here? We spend so much time at work. We should be enjoying it,
It's a great point. All right. So for anybody who wants to pick up the book, The Mac Cheese Millionaire, where can they find it? Can they find it on Amazon? They just Google it and they'll find it?
Absolutely everywhere. Any online site you're used to buying your books, physical bookstores all over the country. Or you can go to my website and there's links to every possible place you could purchase it.
Amazing. Erin Wade, founder of Homeroom, author of The Mac Cheese Millionaire. Really appreciate your time today. I'm very excited to read this book as well. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.
Well, thanks for having me.
That was my interview with Homeroom's Erin Wade. So what should you learn from this interview? Here are my 5 takeaways. My first takeaway is that great experiences don't cost more to create. They just require caring more. Erin said that she opened Homeroom with this vision for a restaurant that brought all of the best parts of fine dining, but applied it to a restaurant format that was more affordable and more casual. Homeroom is this wonderful mac and cheese concept in Oakland. I have been to Homeroom. It's really fantastic. It's truly some of the best mac and cheese you will ever eat. And it's interesting because you might think a mac and cheese restaurant, maybe they would go with a fast casual format. But no, this is a full service restaurant. It does have a takeout spinoff, but a full service restaurant because Erin wanted it to be a place where you would go and dine in and relax and enjoy that ambience. And again, it's a place that she wants you to feel like essentially it's a fine dining restaurant, but you can still afford it and it's still this everyday quality. I love that she said that thing about, she mentioned you just need to care more with some of these touches like the ambiance and the environment of the restaurant. It doesn't cost you more to run a restaurant that's higher quality in its experience. It only costs you more to have better ingredients and better food. And so I think that's a really interesting point to remember. If you want to create a great experience with great hospitality, you just have to really care more first and foremost. My second takeaway is that a better working environment leads to better restaurant performance. This is what we really dug into in the interview and why I wanted to talk to Erin in the first place is that working environment that she is so intentional about. As she mentions in this conversation, she writes about in the book, they designed systems very intentionally within Homeroom to take care of their employees, to build trust among the workforce. And as she mentioned, she wanted it to be collaborative and meaningful, and they accomplished that. And by doing so, they were able to drive stronger restaurant performance. She called out in this interview at one point that her average turnover was over 2 years, whereas normally it's like 90 days average. And the reason for that is because of this trust that she has built with her employees, with her teams, and that collaborative environment that they have developed. My third takeaway is that harassment from your customers may be a bigger problem than you think. This certainly surprised me when Erin spoke about this and talked about the problem of harassment in the restaurant industry from customers specifically. She said she's seen data that shows as many as 70% of hospitality workers have experienced harassment at the hands of customers. And when you think of the scope of this industry, that is millions and millions of people who have experienced this. Erin said she didn't realize it was happening in Homeroom. She said typically a lot of people won't talk about it. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why employees don't bring it up is because they don't think anything will be done about it. They don't think there's anything that can be done. They just assume this is par for the course. This is just part of the job. And they don't they don't bring it up with their manager or, take this issue to their superiors. It goes unreported because they think there's nothing that can be done. But the fact of the matter is something can be done. And Erin has developed this great system for doing something about it. That leads me to my fourth takeaway, which is you owe it to your employees to protect them from harassment and abuse. Consider Erin's system of color coding. I think this is really wonderful. With this system, they have a yellow, orange, and red color coding system where an employee, if they are experiencing a weird vibe from a customer, just a weird vibe, no words exchanged or any physical touch or anything like that, they can bring up a yellow color with their manager, say, I've got a yellow at the table. And that gives that employee an out, that if they want to switch tables or have the manager take over that table, they can simply with a yellow, in that they get a weird vibe from the customers at that table. With orange, it's escalated a little bit to where words are exchanged, some suggestive language has been used. And in that case, when the employee brings up, I've got an orange table, the manager has to take over that table. And then in the instance of red, that means a line has been crossed. There has been physical touch or suggestive language used from the customer. And in a red, that customer is asked to leave. I love this system because, as Erin points out, it empowers the employee to do something about it. But what it is it is a system in place to have an incident reported with very clear instructions of what happens next. If this is nebulous, if you don't have a system in place for a situation like this, you may wonder, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should ask them to leave or maybe I should take over the table. With a system like this, you don't have to ask those questions. As Erin pointed out, it takes out the judgment, or it takes the judgment out of that situation and enforces specific rules. And as Erin pointed out, it has ultimately led to less harassment from customers because it de-escalates the situation. If a yellow is used, if there's a weird vibe from a table and a manager takes over, it has perhaps stopped that situation from getting to an orange or a red. So Erin, what she has done at Homeroom is effectively protected her employees with a specific system that they have designed and built and employed that ultimately, again, protects the employees and prevents these situations from happening as much as they could have. My fifth and final takeaway is that if you want to build a strong culture, start with trust. I brought up that word culture with Erin because so much of what she's doing with Homeroom and with this color coding system, it's culture, right? It's protecting your employees, taking care of them, investing in them, improving turnover. And we all like to use that word culture. But as we talked about, culture can mean, it's kind of a slippery term and it doesn't have a very clear definition of what that is. But I really liked how Erin put it, which is she said, having trust built into the environment. And when you have trust built into the environment, she said that's key to your employees communicating with each other, going to managers with any issues, and ultimately being happier because they have that trust among each other. She says her employees are eager to be there, eager to work and do their best because they have that trust in place. If you want to develop your culture, if that's still something you're working on in your own team, trust is the foundation that you should consider building before anything else. Those are all my takeaways for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe to Takeaway wherever you listen to podcasts and leave your feedback. You can also email me at sam.oches@informa.com. Thanks again, and talk to you next week.
Blending up fun, freshly frozen beverages from shakes and smoothies to bowls and cocktails has never been easier than the For Real by Riches back-of-house blender. Simply grab a For Real by Riches frozen base cup, place it in a blender, and press start for hands-free, mess-free blending in under a minute. Customize or serve it as is? It's that easy. Learn more about For Real by Riches at richesusa.com/forreal-food service.